Welcome to the Rich Mind Podcast.
Today is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to talk about something that is maybe a deep discussion, a little bit more so than what we've been having up to this point on the Rich Mind Podcast. But it's something that I think that if we don't have it soon, let me put it this way. If people can grasp the concept of the thief, that's kind of how I framed it at the end of the last episode, the thief that's stealing from you literally every day. If people can get an idea of even what that thief is, because I think that people just aren't even aware of it, and then maybe some ideas of how to get around as far as making it a positive versus a negative. So first of all, that thief that I keep talking about is inflation. And that term inflation is being thrown around a lot here lately in 2023, 24. When I first started down my own journey, it was something that, so this was back 09, 10. So basically around the Great Recession back in the day is kind of when I started to learn about inflation back in the day. It wasn't as widely discussed as it is today, which is good and it's bad. It's good because people are becoming aware of it. It's bad because it's actually happening a lot more so than what it ever has, at least up my life experience, right? I think we've had terms or times of inflation that have been higher or lower even of what's going on today. But at the same time, I don't think it's happened in my current lifetime, or at least in my adult life, which is affecting me every day. I hear all the time from my wife talking about the prices of milk or whatever going on at the grocery store is probably the biggest thing. And so today I thought that Greg and I would just jump on here, have a conversation about inflation. I want to give you a little bit more ways of maybe looking at it to potentially make it a positive versus a negative, which is what I've tried to do for myself. Just different ways of looking at it that I think that maybe you're not hearing or seeing out there in the mainstream media. Let's put it that way for sure. It is something to pay attention to. It's not necessarily something to be afraid of if you're paying attention. That's the whole point. You've got to be paying attention 100%, because if you're not, then that's where it's going to wipe you out. It's going to be that thief that is going to hurt you in the long run. So before we even get started, let me just make sure that you understand that Greg and I are not tax professionals. We are not financial professionals. We are no professionals at all. We are just two guys trying to figure out this thing called life, investing, financial freedom, abundance, trying to health, wealth, and legacy. That's the pillars of the Rich Mind Podcast. So we're trying to help you discover the same things. So the things that I shared today, they may be accurate. I hope they are. That's how I believe them to be. And I'm going to share them to the best of my ability. Same thing with Greg. We're going to share some experiences that we are dealing with day to day right now in real time. But that's the whole idea. We want to share some ideas, some thoughts, just get you thinking differently than what most folks are. And so that way you can take some different action, and with some different inspired action, you can get some different results. So with that long-winded introduction, Greg, man, get on here and help me. Let's talk about some inflation.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, inflation is, being talked about a lot these days. And like you said, rightfully so, because we are in the thick of it. We're in the middle of it. And I think a lot of people really should understand what it means, because it affects everybody, every class, every person who entrepreneur, W-2, doesn't matter, because we are all spending money every day on goods and services. And that's where, we're going to get into it today, but that's where we're going to see that inflation really, tick up a little bit. And I love the fact that, Randy, you kind of phrased it, how can we hedge inflation? And then we're going to talk about that to, give our listeners and our audience some ways to not be scared of inflation, just be aware of what it is, what it looks like, and what we can do to you really hedge it and take advantage of it in some cases.
Yeah. So we talked I forget exactly how many episodes back, about arbitrage. And that was something, that's one way to look at inflation. And maybe that's something part of the discussion today. We can talk about how you can actually use arbitrage to benefit from inflation versus having, erode your purchasing power. So we're going to get into that here. So I'm pulling up the explanation. Actually, I wanted to just read off the definition of what inflation is, and then we'll get into this discussion. But inflation, this is coming from Wikipedia, is where I looked this up on. And I actually put it into Gemini on Google too. And I had it give me an explanation, and I'm going to read that as well. It was actually similar but different, which is kind of the whole idea, is just getting some contrasting ideas. But inflation is a general increase in the prices of goods and services in the economy. When the general price level rises, unit of currency buys fewer goods and services. Consequently, inflation corresponds to the reduction of the purchasing power of the money, And so that's that last sentence there is what I really want you to focus on, folks. It's the reduction of the purchasing power of the money. So one thing I say a lot is that people are consumed with the idea that prices are rising, that it's your house prices are rising, that even food prices are rising. And it's not you just think about like eggs in the grocery store. The eggs didn't change. It's the same chicken, laid the same eggs, laid the whatever. It's the purchasing power of the currency or the money is the difference. So why does that happen? So once again, that's going to be the discussion we have today is why is that purchasing power being eroded, which is what inflation truly is. So we'll get into that. So that was the Wikipedia explanation of what that is. Let me go over. I actually typed it into Gemini. So people talk about ChatGPT. I use Gemini a lot, which, I don't know if one's better than the other. Sometimes I'll use a little bit of both. But anyways, I typed it in and I said, hey, give me we're going to have a discussion about inflation here on the podcast. Give me a definition or an explanation of what inflation is. So that way I can share it with my listeners. And here's what it said. I won't read the entire thing because it was 2 or 3 paragraphs, but the funny part was this one here at the top, and we're going to talk about that as well. So it's all right, let's break it down. Imagine your favorite bag of chips last year. It cost $2. Now it costs $3 for the same bag. That's inflation at work. Your money buys less of the same stuff over time. And I thought that was a pretty good way of kind of just framing that in your mind. And I think people comprehend that. It's just a matter of paying attention to it. As I mentioned, I think that our day-to-day activities are being impacted by it more and more, which is why I think it's top of mind, more today than it has been in a long time. What were your thoughts on the explanations or the definitions that I read so far?
Yeah. So, I think the easiest one to relate to is, the bag of chips. That one, I think everybody can see. And literally that's just one product in the grocery store. There's thousands of products in the grocery store that are ticking up. And like you said, it looks like it's ticking up in price, which maybe it is, but the purchasing power is being diluted. So however you want to kind of visualize that in your mind. And you may think it's only an extra $1 or an extra 50 cents here, but that's for almost every product that you're putting on that conveyor belt every week when you go to the grocery store. So it adds up pretty quickly. And that's one of the conversations that, I've had with my wife about how to kind of outpace inflation is to, I don't want to say simply, but make more money, because you're not going to save your way to that extra $1 for those bag of chips every week. You really have to go out there and, invest well, earn more money, really get ahead of that wave, which we could kind of dive into a little bit more. But personally, that's the conversation that I've had in the last couple of years with my wife about our personal finances and our household budget and everything. And that's usually my answer is, let's go out and create more value and make more money.
So let's go down that more money idea, because I think that's a big part of it. So where this, in my opinion, okay, so once again, this isn't advice. This is just my study of the economy and what's going on. A lot of the inflation that we're seeing today stem from the pandemic that we just came through last 4 or 5 years ago is when it all started. It's hard to believe it's been that long. It feels like it was just yesterday. Thank goodness it was that long, and I wish obviously it would never have happened. But the point is that they disrupted the supply chain, meaning the supply of goods and services were disrupted like zero to a halt. And I physically felt that because I was running my Amazon business at the time and I couldn't get products and services to the consumer. That was my business. My business was to buy things and sell them to other folks, right? That wanted them. It was the arbitrage trade that I was doing. And I couldn't get products. Amazon was still working because they were, I don't know if they were considered essential or whatever they were back in the day, but they were still delivering, right? I think that was probably where the popularity even picked up because you didn't have to go to the store to get whatever you wanted. The problem was that you couldn't get what you wanted because there wasn't enough stuff. And because there wasn't enough stuff, and then on top of that, the government or the Fed or however you want to put it, right, the Treasury distributed all of this currency, all of this money out to in our stimmy checks that we received. So we've got lack of goods, lack of supply, and a whole bunch of money sloshing around in the economy chasing after fewer and fewer goods, which chased up those prices a lot. Even for my own business, when I was able to finally get my hand on a little bit of supply, prices were increasing very rapidly, not only for what I was having to purchase them for, but for what I was selling them for. I think that a lot of times folks will get that confused. They think that just because prices are increasing out there in the marketplace, they blame the business owner. Well, it's the entire supply chain that gets it to that business owner. They don't consider that, right? They don't consider the cost that it takes to still have that same unit out there in the marketplace. So it's that money, when that large amount of money was sloshing around in the economy, people had a whole bunch saved up in their bank accounts, right? Because you couldn't necessarily spend it on anything. So what did you do? You went out and bought stuff as soon as you possibly could. And that was increasing prices tremendously. We just went through a huge wave of inflation in housing. Greg, I know being a realtor or past realtor, right? And in the real estate realm, you saw that. I saw that in my own current house, or the house that I was in before. I'm currently renting now because I don't want to say I sold at the top, but I saw what was happening. People felt wealthy, felt like they had a bunch of money all saved up, and they were chasing after fewer and fewer goods, which were housing at the time, which were bidding up prices. There were people paying over asking, no inspections, just the, I call it craziness. I mean, you can call it whatever you want. If you got caught up in that, then, that's obviously, that's a personal development thing, right? You've got to understand what's going on. But the point that I want to try to get across to this conversation that we're having today is that it's a lack of supply, along with the increase in the amount of currency units or dollars or money, whatever currency you have in whatever jurisdiction, whatever country you live in. If the supply isn't keeping up with that demand, prices are going to rise. So anyways, hopefully I worded that well. What are your thoughts on that so far, Greg?
Yeah, no, that was great. The supply and demand obviously comes into effect with every economic discussion that we're going to have here. But I think the one thing that I was going to talk about is I think some people, including myself, when I was uneducated about inflation, I thought inflation went up and then it came down. It was just like this, temporary inflation. It's going up, but inflation is never, like, the price of milk is never going to go down to $2 a gallon ever again, unless it's on sale or something. But
it could, and here's why, or here's how, right? So if there's an oversupply, milk is kind of tough because it has an expiration date. Mm-hmm. But let's say it had no expiration date. So but the increase in the amount was more than the demand. The owner of that business would have to keep dropping prices to obviously then eventually sell through that inventory.
Right.
So that's one way it could go. I'm not, so as far as going from where it is today down to whatever level down below, it would just have to be a supply issue of there needs to be more of it available without an expiration date, right? Obviously, you can't have milk sitting on the shelf for months or years at a time, but at the same time, yeah, that's really what we're struggling with right now.
But I think just in general, like, people assume, like, I know when talking to like my parents, they were saying, oh, like, candy bars back in the day were a nickel or a dime, and you're like, how is it so cheap back then? Like, that's kind of my point of, I don't think the supply and demand is going to be shrunk that much where like candy bars are going to be a nickel again or a dime, and even if it is going to go back to that price, it's not going to stay there, right? It's probably going to be a temporary, like we had in the pandemic. It was, supply and demand was really out of whack. Then it kind of corrected itself with the supply and demand. So that's why prices are going up. So that's kind of my point of, I don't think prices are ever going to, like, we're never going to, see, I remember a candy bar as a kid were 50 cents. And I was in the gas station the other day. They were like, a regular candy bar was like $2.19. And I was like, oh my, like, it just blew my mind, because I remember as a kid, you walk into a gas station or something with $1, you were good. You can buy one, maybe two candy bars. And, like you're talking about, the purchasing power of that dollar 30, 40 years later, it's not there. You walk in with $1 and you're like, I can't get anything here, so I might as well walk outside. And, I don't know. It's just very eye-opening experience comparing those prices as a kid to now, and especially as an adult, really understanding and talking through inflation right here.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit earlier in the conversation about wages, right? And trying to increase your wages and increase your value in the marketplace. So that's another piece of the problem why inflation is really stinging a lot of folks these days, is that our wages are the value that we can create in the marketplace to get a return, which is income or wages, depending if you own a business or if you have a job, is not keeping up with that amount of price increase, which makes it appear higher maybe than normal. So I started talking about a little bit about the Federal Reserve. They have a mandate they want to try to keep inflation at 2% per year. So they want to continue to increase the amount of money, the currency units in the marketplace they're trying to keep it stable, but they're trying for 2% a year. So that just means that at a minimum, prices are going to continue to rise. What the issue is that they began to rise too much. And so they're trying to get that back under control. And the way, how I understand it to be, and the way they're going to continue to do that is through the credit markets. So if credit continues to rise, if the ability for folks to continue to go out and get credit, so think about buying a car, thinking about big purchases. I mean, think about a house, think about going to college, think about, big purchases. Those purchases are funded through banks. The banks are the one that are creating the money that you then receive to then pay the institution or wherever you're buying the thing from. That is also inflation. So that's what's creating that inflation. So if our wages aren't keeping up with the amount or the percentage that's being created of credit or of the currency units, then that's where it's going to continue to sting. It's going to continue to be showing up in our grocery budgets, going to continue to show up at the gas pumps. So maybe that's another good example, right? Is that even with prices with gasoline, they turn on and turn off the spigot, right? I mean, I know that makes it a very simplified idea, right? But just then that idea with gasoline, right? They have the ability to pump more or pump less. And that supply versus demand is what increases or decreases the amount of price in the marketplace. So just keep remembering that as well. But yeah, I just want to make sure they understand that so back in 2008, which is what happened, there was a credit crisis. So when the banks quit lending, prices fell. That's why housing, that's why a lot of things, there was the beginning forms of deflation, which in reality, for those of us that out here in the world, deflation would be a good thing. If prices were going down and our wages were staying the same, how much better would our life be? My life would be fantastic. Can you imagine if prices were actually decreasing by 2% per year, but you're able to keep up because of the value that you're adding to the marketplace? You're able to keep your wages and keep your income in your business the same. Can you imagine what that would be like? What are your thoughts on that, Greg? Can you imagine if there was actually deflation?
Yeah, that would be interesting because I've never experienced that. But I think the only equivalent would be, like we're talking about, is increasing your income, because that's the same thing as, basically having prices decrease and your wages staying the same, as opposed to prices maybe increase by 2%, but then say you increase your business income by, say, 25%, right? Or an easier example is if you're making $5,000 a month and all of a sudden you're making $10,000 a month, you can pay that extra $1 for the potato chips because you just basically doubled your income for that month after month, year after year. So you're well ahead of that wave. Whereas, if you're kind of staying in your same job or maybe getting a 1% or 2% raise every year, but inflation is, increasing or is more than that 2%, then that's going to cause that discord and that disconnect. And you might be, feeling that sting a lot more than that other person who just doubled their income and really got ahead of that wave.
So that's where here on the Rich Mind Podcast, Greg and I want to encourage you to think of different ways to become more valuable in the marketplace. You can offer your products and services. You can become more valuable even at your current employment. We talk about skills, getting some different skills that are more valuable out there in the marketplace. Sales is a big skill. Anything. That's the greatest way, as Greg just referenced there, which was a great example, right? The best way to get ahead of some of this inflation is to just increase your amount of skills in the marketplace and then be rewarded more for them through different payment, as far as like whether you're receiving revenue from your business or if you're obviously receiving different things from, maybe it's a different job. But if you're stuck with your COLA raise, I don't know if anybody do you know what COLA is? So cost of living. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you're stuck in that mindset that you're only going to be or you are confined to your COLA raise or your cost of living raise each year where do they base that off of? They base that off of what the Fed is contributing, or what they're saying this inflation is going to be, right? So if they're saying inflation is the target of 2%, that's where you get your 2% raise every year. When in reality, inflation was actually on Shadow Stats. That'd be a great place to go look. Shadow Stats is a website that talks about inflation, how it was calculated back in the 70s and 80s, where it was probably a little bit more accurate than it is today. They hide some things from us that make it look like it's even less than it really truly is. But so on shadow stats, I was just taking a peek, and it said inflation, inflation based on what it was just a few decades ago, is running anywhere between 8 and 10%. Well, imagine if you're getting an 8 or 10% raise each year, how much of a difference that would make. And that's the point that we're trying to make. You have the ability to take that in your own hands, right? You have the ability to go out there, get the skills, figure out how to add value into the marketplace, build a small business, start a podcast, create a community. All of those types of things is very possible. And you can do all those things to try to combat some of this inflation as well. So one thing that we talked about before we hopped on here, Greg, is you had a concept, and I don't want to say it because I want you to say it, as far as one thing that we've learned about inflation and how it's another way of looking at it. You talked about the candy bars, right, being the same size and that type of thing. What was that? I'm curious. Let's have a conversation about that too.
Yeah, so that concept is called shrinkflation. Basically, it is, exactly what you said. The candy bar from 30 years ago compared to now is a lot smaller. It's smaller now than it was back in the day. So they're basically shrinking the product. They still make it look the same. Sometimes they make it look even bigger, but the amount of product that you actually get, I know like potato chips, like you mentioned, is a great example. Sometimes you get a bag and you're like, oh, this is such a big bag. And then you open it and then all of the air comes out of it. And you're like, well, there's only like a third of potato chips in this whole bag.
It's all air, like the top 2/3 of the bag, right? And all of a sudden there's just a few crumbs on the bottom for sure.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. And, I think we mentioned it offline where, you said a bottle of Coke went from, I think, 20 ounces to 17 ounces or 16 ounces. Then it goes down to, 7.9 ounces for a can or whatever that is. And, and, the price will stay the same. Sometimes the price will actually go up while the size goes down. So they can kind of get you on both ends of that, which is, I don't want to say highway robbery, but it's not cool. It's not fun.
It's definitely inflation at work, right? In a negative way towards us. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, something to kind of keep an eye on too. I've had a conversation with a family member recently. They said, yeah, this product doesn't seem to last as long as it used to. I'm like, yeah, that's probably why. Look at the numbers and look how many ounces are in the product or whatever it is. And, I don't want to say track everything, but, just be aware of it.
But you'll just notice, right? You'll see it. As you mentioned, I worked in the retail industry for 20 plus years. So I was dealing with products day in and day out. My Amazon business was dealing with food products every day. So I was seeing it in real life, meaning the product would get smaller, but it would still either cost me the same or cost me more to get that same product, which was frustrating, very much so. But yeah, shrinkflation. When I first heard that too several years ago, I just wanted to definitely bring that up as a topic of conversation here today, so people can, once again, it's becoming aware. It's becoming aware of what it is. It's becoming aware of why it's happening, but discovering different ways to combat it, to make it a positive versus a negative. So maybe that's one thing we can leave folks as we start to wind this one up here today, Greg, is maybe just some ideas of what they can do. We've talked about you can increase the value add to the marketplace, right? Increase your revenue. Sometimes it might mean getting a second job. Sometimes it might mean getting a side hustle. Sometimes it might mean going above and beyond at your current employer to earn a bonus or whatever. I don't know exactly what those solutions are, but there are many. And the idea is that you come up with what's going on in your current circumstances. But one idea that I would definitely wanted to share with folks that they need to comprehend, and we're going to go a little bit more into depth of it in the next episode, but the difference between good debt versus bad debt and how just understanding the difference. And if you're in good debt during inflation, that's a positive. That's going to add wind to the sail, right? You're actually going to increase your wealth, your ability, your own purchasing power faster by stacking up good debt. So once again, it goes along with the banks. You can use banks to work in your favor as your partner, or you can use them as a negative, which is consumer debt. That would be bad debt. So maybe let's just touch base on the good debt versus bad debt discussion as we wrap this one up here. And this has been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is, I think both conversations definitely tie into each other. Inflation, good debt, bad debt. Like you said, we're trying to, give our audience action steps, not just the doom and gloom of inflation is bad and that's it. Sorry, folks, we don't know what to tell you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Nope. We're going to help you guys. We're going to give you guys some some tips and tricks and ideas. Like you said, Randy, everybody's situation is different, so take from it what you will. But yeah, we're going to hop into the good debt, bad debt. Going to be a great, fun conversation. And yeah, so I think that, I don't know, wraps it up on my end anyway for inflation. That's all I kind of got.
Yeah. So just understand, folks, that good debt. So Robert Kiyosaki is a huge influence on my life. He's taught me so much from financial education. He's really helped me comprehend ideas of inflation. That's kind of where I heard from it for the first time, which has sent me down many, many rabbit trails of trying to discover it on a deeper level, how I can benefit from it versus being swallowed up by it. And that good debt versus bad debt, if I could say that 5 times fast, right? It's good debt, bad debt, bad debt. I get that stumbled up in my own mind. So the conversation of the good debt versus bad debt, and Robert's definition of that is good debt puts money in your pocket, and bad debt takes money from your pocket. So if you're just trying to keep it super simple, consumer debt, if you have to go to work to pay for a particular product based on that it's in debt, right? Whether it's a car, whether it's he argued that it's even your house, which I fall into that category. I believe that as well. So if you have to go to work to earn income, whether it's a job or a business, and that income has to pay for your debt, that's bad debt. But if you borrow from the same bank or from a bank, let's just put it that way, and use that debt to purchase assets, which are things that are going to put money into your pocket. So they can be obviously real estate. We've talked about real estate, and we'll get into more detail about that in the future, but it's positive cash flow real estate. That is good debt. It can be your business. I talked about Amazon a few times, right? So I was using debt to purchase inventory. That was then, I knew that within, I forget exactly what my turnaround time was. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks. So the time that I bought it to the time that money came back with friends, meaning I made a profit, was about 21 days approximately. And I had to monitor that very well. So I was very active in that process, but I made sure that I was on top of it. But that ability to borrow, I considered it to be good debt for my business. But it can easily go the other direction if you're not paying attention. And that's kind of the idea with this episode today. You've got to definitely be understanding what inflation is, the use of good debt versus bad debt, and then applying those things into your life as much as you possibly can. So the big takeaways today is, number 1, understand what it is. Number 2, understand you're in control, or you need to become more in control through your income, right? Deciding what type of income you want to try to get more of, whether it's through your job or through building a business. But then also understanding that good debt versus bad debt idea. It's not that you won't ever have consumer debt. I think that sometimes you have some all the time, a little, but it's the idea of make sure that's under control. I try to eliminate as much as I possibly can and try to stack up as much good debt as I possibly can as well. Any more closing thoughts on those ideas, Greg, before we hop off here today and then head on to the next episode?
I think you nailed it. I love the takeaways, and really looking forward to the good debt, bad debt conversation, especially as it relates to, investing, real estate, everything you mentioned. It's, right up our alley. So should be fun.
Appreciate it. Well, folks, this next episode, a little bit of a teaser again, is that I want to go into deeper about the cash flow board game. So if you're catching us on video, I always have the cash flow board game on my left, probably on the right side of the screen. But anyways, it's a fantastic game. So Robert and Kim Kiyosaki created the cash flow board game, and it was something that has 100%, 1,000,000% impacted my family's life, the trajectory of where we were going. It kind of goes along with the discussion we just had with inflation, good debt versus bad debt. And what I want to do with Greg is he's played the game as well. And I just want to give you some takeaways, some of the big takeaways from that game, how you can use those ideas in your own life to positively impact you and get ahead of this inflation versus having it swallow you up. So we're just going to have a discussion about that. The big takeaways, what we've learned, some of the things that you can do in your own life. That's really what I try to do. I say all the time around my house is that I'm actually trying to play the cash flow board game in real life. Mm-hmm. It's just, you know what I mean? It's just, trying to keep it super simple, but that's really what I'm trying to do. And when you learn the concepts inside that game and then start to implement it, you can really start making some positive impact. So excited to dive into that. So folks, go out there, share this message with your family and friends. If you wouldn't mind, help Greg and I try to expand the Rich Mind podcast. We'd greatly appreciate that. If you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@richmind.co and head over to richmind.co and grab some of the free resources that we have over there and stay connected with us. We look forward to coming back with the next episode again very soon. We appreciate your time and attention, and we'll talk again very soon. Until then, bye now.
Thank you for joining us today on the Rich Mind Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and share it with someone you know. Also, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform and never miss an episode. One last thing, don't ever forget that your mind is the first place where wealth is created. Keep dreaming big, take action, and together, let's build wealth, a legacy, and a life we love.